It's only a matter of time. That's what Russia wants the world, and especially Ukraine, to believe about the fall of Pokrovsk. The city is encircled, comes the propaganda cry from Russia. Ukraine's soldiers should surrender now, or they will burn along with the city that they're trying to defend. There is no denying that the situation in Pokrovsk doesn't look great for Ukraine, but the fall of the city isn't inevitable. Pokrovsk won't break, as Ukraine has shut down the Kremlin propaganda that claims the vital Donetsk city is encircled. Of course, you wouldn't know that if you had only heard reports about Russia's advance into Pokrovsk during the last few days. The propaganda is so strong that several mainstream media outlets are reporting that the city's fall is imminent. The Guardian is among those outlets. On November 5th, it published a piece in which it claimed that Russia's forces are tightening their grip on Pokrovsk as fighting rages throughout the city. Granted, The Guardian also notes that there are conflicting accounts of what's happening in Pokrovsk, and we'll get to Ukraine's account soon. However, it also seems to claim that Russia has the upper hand. In recent weeks, Russian forces have sharply intensified their attacks, initially relying on small dismounted assault groups before gradually massing enough troops to launch a broader offensive on the city, the outlet claimed. It also noted research from Ukrainian deep state open source initiative, which says that its tracking of the front line reveals that Russian forces have advanced deeper into Pokrovsk and the city's outskirts. Those advances aren't completed. The areas in question are still shaded grey on deep state's maps, indicating ongoing fighting. Still, the situation would appear to be bleak for Ukraine. Russia certainly seems to believe that it's going to take Pokrovsk soon. Or at least it wants Ukraine to think that it's in a strong enough position to force the collapse of the city. Also on November 5th, Reuters reported that Russia is telling Ukrainian soldiers in the cities of Pokrovsk and Kupiansk that they need to surrender now because they'll have no chance of surviving if they don't. NBC reported the same news, adding that Russia's defense ministry is claiming that the Ukrainian forces are already trapped inside both cities and they won't be able to do anything to stop Russia's troops from advancing. Even some Ukrainian soldiers are pointing out that the situation is bad. One of those soldiers is Sergeant Liana Kononchuk, who served with a Ukrainian military unit operating in Pokrovsk. She tells NBC, "The situation is difficult. We are trying to control it, but unfortunately, it's only been getting worse lately." Kononchuk adds that far from conducting a sweeping assault, Russia is instead using a seeping strategy. As of now, there is no permanent line of defense as such. The enemy seeps northwards by 1, 2, 3 units at a time, thereby trying to erode the front line, she tells NBC. The message getting out there is that Ukraine's Pokrovsk forces are surrounded. Russia has finally managed to pull off the encirclement it's been trying to create since May. Vladimir Putin's forces may have failed to take Pokrovsk during the summer, as Putin had initially planned. With the city encircled, it's only a matter of time before Pokrovsk falls. Assuming Russia is telling the truth, the collapse of Pokrovsk may even come before Christmas. But therein lies the sticking point. Russia may not be telling the truth. The country has been claiming to have encircled Pokrovsk for weeks now, and there are plenty of Ukrainian voices that are denying this supposed situation. Ukraine says that this is all just Russian propaganda. Pokrovsk certainly isn't safe, those voices are saying, but the situation isn't as dire as Russia claims. The Kyiv Independent was among the first outlets to contradict Russia's claims of encirclement. On October 29th, it said, "Ukrainian commanders' reports as well as open-source data show that Putin's claim of a complete encirclement is still far from reality, but the situation is undoubtedly highly dynamic and deteriorating for the defending side." The outlet highlighted that Russia had indeed managed to plant one of its flags on the western outskirts of Pokrovsk. However, that flag planting was more an exercise in information control than it was dominance over Ukraine. Russia had sent a small group in to plant the flag, take photos, and get out of Dodge before Ukraine's drones came calling. That's hardly an encirclement. None of this is to say that encroachments into Pokrovsk aren't happening, the outlet adds. They are, however, the Russian forces entering the city are small in number and are getting into Pokrovsk via infiltration, rather than full frontal assaults. Taking to Facebook, the commander-in-chief of Ukraine's armed forces, Alexander Syrsky, explained what Russia's assaults on Pokrovsk really look like, noting that Putin's claims about the Pokrovsk and Kupiansk situations do not correspond with reality, Syrsky said. Along with that, in Pokrovsk, the enemy infantry, avoiding clashes, accumulates in urban development, changes places of residence, so the primary task is to detect and destroy it. Some reports claim that Russia isn't fighting inside Pokrovsk, it's hiding, with its troops offering Putin small propaganda victories as they wait to be hunted down by Ukraine's forces. But what about Kononchuk's mentions of the difficulties Ukraine is facing? She isn't wrong, but other Ukrainian soldiers are quick to point out that Russia's seeping strategy doesn't constitute a full encirclement of Pokrovsk. Speaking to TSN on November 3rd, a soldier who goes by the call sign Sonic explained the situation from their perspective. Sonic serves with the Dovbush Hornet's Strike UAV unit as a drone operator, and they told TSN, "There's no full encirclement, neither in Minarad nor in Pokrovsk. Unfortunately, fighting is ongoing in both places. The enemy is present there, moving in, and now in rather large groups." Again, Ukraine's situation in Pokrovsk isn't perfect, but the encirclement Putin and his cronies claim is in effect simply isn't there, assuming Ukraine is to be believed. Sonic continued, noting that Russia is at least no longer throwing away its infantry as though it were its cannon fodder anymore. The country has gotten smarter in the tactical sense, and Pokrovsk is being used as a proving ground for the seeping strategy we mentioned earlier. However, many of the soldiers that Russia is sending into the city aren't equipped to exercise the level of control that Putin wants. Roughly 80% of them are ordinary infantrymen, Sonic claims. Most have no combat experience and are working on short-term contracts. This makes them easy picking for Ukraine's drone units once the infiltrating forces are located. This infantry herd is being controlled from the outskirts of Pokrovsk, and there are some Russian units that know how to fight. There aren't many of them, but they exist, Sonic concludes. Still, his point is an important one. Pokrovsk isn't encircled. On November 5th, another Ukrainian denial of Pokrovsk encirclement emerged. Barron's reported on this one, noting that the Ukrainian General Staff has added its voice to the argument. "There is no encirclement of our units and divisions," the General Staff said on November 5th. It added that Ukraine is fighting tooth and nail to defend one of its most valuable cities from Russian aggression. "Measures are being taken to block the enemy, who is attempting to infiltrate," it said. "Active resistance to attempts by enemy infantry groups to establish positions is ongoing." Putin is trying to make it seem like the fall of Pokrovsk is happening as we speak, and that the city will collapse in a matter of days. That isn't the case. Pokrovsk is still in danger, but there is no encirclement. Russia's propaganda is being refuted by Ukrainian evidence on the ground, and Ukraine says that it's actively putting measures into place that will stop Russian forces in their tracks. What are those measures? News.ua highlights a few. It says that Ukraine has set up search and rescue squads that are operating inside Pokrovsk. This operation involves units from Ukraine's 425th Special Operations Command, SBS operators, combined groups of the Special Operations Command, the Special Operations Command of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, the National Guard, and the Military District of the Ministry of Defense. In addition to the search and rescue efforts, Ukraine is doing something that we mentioned earlier: seek and destroy. Its targets are the small units of Russian infiltrators, and Ukraine's efforts are effective. News.ua notes that the 24 hours before November 5th alone saw Ukraine kill 26 Russian soldiers, injure a further 64, and destroy 58 Russian shelters in and around Pokrovsk. Extend the view to the past 3 days and Russia's losses add up even more. Putin's forces have suffered 249 casualties, 159 of which are irrevocable since the beginning of the week. Russia has also lost 26 vehicles and motorcycles, along with 7 drone control points, a tank, and an armored vehicle. These numbers aren't as heavy as we've seen in the past because Russia is eschewing the full frontal assault strategy it has previously used when trying to take Ukraine's cities. However, they are notable because the losses are heavy in the context of Russia's new sweeping strategy. A lot of the soldiers inside Pokrovsk are dying. If the city were encircled, as Putin claims, Russia's forces would be pouring in from all directions by now. Ukraine is putting everything that it has into the defense of Pokrovsk. In addition to adapting its operations inside the city to account for Russia's new tactics, it's deploying some of its most elite units to aid in the defense of the city. That's according to The Guardian, which reported on November 2nd that Ukrainian Special Forces operators had entered Pokrovsk. At the time, The Guardian said around 200 Russian soldiers had managed to penetrate into Pokrovsk. That puts the figures we shared a moment ago into better context. There were 200 Russians in Pokrovsk on November 2nd, and presumably a handful that entered the city in the days that followed. Then the 249 Russian casualties reported between November 2nd and 4th mostly add up. Almost all of the infiltrators are being taken out before they really establish footholds. The same report from The Guardian also carries more quotes from Siersky, who says that Pokrovsk is under pressure from an enemy group thousands strong, but Russia isn't making those numbers count. Again, Pokrovsk isn't encircled, and Ukraine is maintaining logistics through and around the city, even amidst Russia's seeping assaults. Now, with special forces getting involved, Ukraine's defense of Pokrovsk will become better organized and more capable of taking out the Russian infiltration units, and those forces may already be having an effect. Ukraine has scored a major victory in its battle for both Pokrovsk and against Russia's propaganda. Also on November 5th, the Kyiv Independent carried a report on Ukraine's forces securing the Pokrovsk City Council building and raising their country's flag. The operation was conducted by Ukraine's 425th Separate Assault Regiment, which took to Telegram to exclaim, "Stormtroopers of the Skel Regiment returned the Ukrainian flag to the City Council building in Pokrovsk." The same brigade also published a video on YouTube where it explains the operation and showcases footage of the storming of the building and the raising of the flag. Interestingly, the video also shows that not everything went according to plan in the counter-assault. A Ukrainian military vehicle was struck by one of Russia's drones during the operation, leading to a Ukrainian soldier suffering a slight injury. The commander of the 1st Assault Battalion of the 425th Separate Assault Regiment explains that this was the very soldier who helped complete the operation. The commander, dubbed Fighter, says he refused to be evacuated, saying he would complete the task. He reached the target and raised the flag. UKR Inform shares a similar report. It adds that members of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate have also made their way into Pokrovsk, and that the Ukrainian units stationed in the city are being reinforced as we speak. Ukraine seems to be preparing for a much tougher fight. But again, the reality is that this particular fight isn't happening yet. Pokrovsk isn't encircled, even though it may be in the future. Right now, Ukraine is fighting against small groups of Russian forces that hole up and hope for the best after they enter the city. This isn't Russian dominance, it's an invitation for Ukrainian destruction. There is one more piece of evidence that suggests Russia is lying about the Pokrovsk encirclement. Australia's ABC reported that Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed on November 3rd that there were around 300 Russian soldiers inside Pokrovsk. Those soldiers have made no major gains since entering the city. In Kupiansk, which Putin also claims Ukraine should evacuate, there are just 60 soldiers. These aren't city-taking forces, they are small infiltration groups Putin is using to create a narrative of Russian domination, even though the soldiers in those groups are being killed by Ukraine's defenders. So what are we to gather from all this? There are two sides to every story, and Russia seems to be untrue. There is no denying that Pokrovsk is in trouble. Siersky himself says that Russia has dedicated thousands of soldiers to taking the city, though Sonik's claims about those soldiers being primarily brand new recruits with no combat experience highlights the caliber of the forces Russia is using. As usual, it's all about numbers, though those numbers aren't being used in frontal assaults. Russia's soldiers infiltrate Pokrovsk in small groups and often die soon afterwards. As for the claims of encirclement, Russia says yes and Ukraine says no. It's difficult to determine who's actually telling the truth, though so many of the regions around Pokrovsk being denoted as grey zones by Deep State suggest that Russia doesn't have as solid a foothold in the city's outskirts as it wants people to believe. The fighting in Pokrovsk still rages. But if what Putin claims about encirclement is true, Russia will be pressing its advantage in Pokrovsk with thousands of soldiers, not the couple of hundred that it's sneaking into the city. All of this brings us to two questions. Why does Ukraine need to hold Pokrovsk, and will it succeed in repelling Russia's latest advances? In terms of the need, Pokrovsk is one of the most important cities in the Donetsk region that Putin wants to control. The BBC explains why in a November 5th article, where it notes that Putin has been pushing for Pokrovsk ever since the fall of Avdiivka in February 2024. For over a year and a half, Russia has been trying and failing to take Pokrovsk, and it's only now getting anywhere close to a position where it might succeed. Ukraine needs to hold on because the fall of Pokrovsk could create a domino effect. If Pokrovsk falls, defending its satellite city of Mirnorad becomes almost untenable, and Russian troops would then be able to turn their focus to the battle for Konstantinivka to the northeast and the rest of the so-called fortress belt cities of Druzhkivka, Kramatorsk, and Slovyansk, the BBC reports. Ukraine would also lose a vital logistical hub that helps to keep the soldiers in that fortress belt supplied. However, losing Pokrovsk doesn't mean the end of Ukraine's Donetsk defense either. It will be a tough blow to take, but Ukraine has defensive lines in Donetsk to which it could withdraw. Pokrovsk fall will be the culmination of almost 2 years of effort for very little territorial gain on Russia's part, and afterward, Putin would then have to deal with the other fortress belt cities that will be reinforced by retreating Pokrovsk defenders. In short, it could be years before Russia takes Donetsk, even if Ukraine loses Pokrovsk. The BBC reports that the Institute for the Study of War says the same thing, as it claims that Russia has no means of rapidly enveloping or penetrating the fortress belt. So the fall of Pokrovsk would be damaging to Ukraine, but by no means war-ending. It wouldn't even end the Donetsk conflict, especially as Russia would have burned through tens of thousands of soldiers and thousands of units of equipment to take the city. So we have an idea of what happens next if Pokrovsk falls, but will it? The answer depends on who you ask. DW reports that several Ukrainian soldiers are saying that Russia is slowly closing off the logistical lifelines that keep Pokrovsk defenses ticking. Getting access to positions is very difficult. There are only 1 or 2 land routes left, and one of them is under constant shelling, one Ukrainian pilot told the outlet. France 24 also says that Ukraine is struggling to hold Pokrovsk because it hasn't quite adapted to the sieping tactics that we mentioned earlier. The reinforcements and adaptations we mentioned earlier in the video would see Ukraine start to counter Russia's approach of sending small infantry squads into Pokrovsk. However, it remains to be seen whether the Ukrainian adjustment will be quick enough to prevent the fall of the city. One thing is for certain, drones alone can't hold Pokrovsk. On November 5th, Reuters spoke to a drone squad commander named Huss, who said that it was soldiers operating on foot that would ultimately determine Pokrovsk's fate, even with drones playing such a key role in the city's defense. It is the foot of the infantryman that marks, so to speak, where we hold our ground, not a drone in the sky. His message seems to be clear. Ukraine needs more soldiers inside Pokrovsk. Again, reinforcements are arising. Other analysts, however, suggest that the talk of the fall of Pokrovsk may be premature. That's according to the Independent's World Affairs editor Sam Kiley. And even if the city does fall, Ukraine has some nasty surprises awaiting Russia. The landscape behind the Ukrainian front lines has been prepared for a fighting retreat by key forces. Thousands of miles of trenches, barriers, tank traps, and barbed wire mazes have been laid. No doubt secret minefields, stay-behind bunkers for behind-the-lines operations, and meticulously calibrated targeting will make Russia's next phase another session in the meat grinder of Ukraine's eastern front, Kiley writes. Still, for now, at least, Pokrovsk isn't encircled. If it is in the future, it looks like Ukraine's plan will be to beat a hasty retreat from a city that David Axe claims has cost Russia over 100,000 soldiers. And those soldiers who survive won't be able to savor the victory for long. Putin will force them onward, right into the brutal defenses that Ukraine has waiting for them behind the Pokrovsk line. Ukraine may also have a new weapon it can use in the fight against Russia's attempts to encircle Pokrovsk. A new drone has made attacks in the Russian deep rear possible, and it's already on the hunt. One of Russia's elite drone units has already been devastated by these drones, as you'll learn if you watch our video. And if you enjoyed this video, remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more updates on the situation in Pokrovsk. And thank you for watching.